Well, here we go. Deck 78.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, and welcome back to Deck 78, the pop culture podcast from the Inglorious Treksperts and the 430 movie. I'm here with Stephen Melching, Ashley Edward Miller, and Darren Docterman. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Hello.
Are you excited about today's episode?
I'm very excited because I had a little part of it.
You did. You had a great one-on-one conversation with Ed Gross, who wrote the incredible hefty tome, Voices from Krypton. And once again, you'll be talking about Superman. Oh, Superman. Yeah. And you don't have to go to the Phantom Zone to hear this conversation. You just got to stay right here on Deck 78.
That's right.
And
in our fortress of Potitude.
Welcome to the Fortress of Potitude. Oh, we got to do that. If we had any print ads, I would say that would be a great ad. Welcome to the Fortress of Potitude. That really distinguishes Deck 78 from the Treksperts and
from the other
podcast, because we're in our little Fortress of Potitude. That actually could be a good podcast, but we don't need to add any podcasts.
No, we don't need any more.
We got plenty, because we got the Inglorious Treksperts, we got the 430 movie, Cartoon Barroom's come back. There's the Weirded Beardos with Darren and Kirk Thatcher. A lot of good stuff going on.
A lot of good stuff, Maynard.
And then there's the Treksperts briefing room with Peter and Lisa as well.
That's right.
So
a completely different podcast.
Completely different podcast. Not to be confused with the Glorious Treksperts, although it often is.
Well, that's all right.
Yeah. But today we're talking about Superman. And tell us a little bit about that conversation, because, of course, we've had Ed on the show before. He was a great guest. But you had a chance to sit down with him at San Jose GalaxyCon for a great conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We didn't stick to the book, even though his book is great. We
more
basically
cracks about the book.
Yeah, we basically just went through the as you'll hear, the whole history of Superman, from comic book to radio to television to movies to
radio,
VR, radio. No, it's a lot of fun, and we get pretty deep into the woods. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I was going to grace you with a rendition of Into the Woods, but as we learned on a previous episode, I hate musicals.
You don't like musicals.
I've never liked them. I
never forgiven them for the death of his boy.
And
I do not like it. I don't.
You do.
Not in a boat.
You were just afraid to admit it.
No,
you're afraid
I don't like musicals. I like
Spiner.
Hamilton.
Are you at least musical curious?
No, not at all. You know what I liked?
Not even once. Not even
I'll give you a really esoteric musical I liked. City of Angels with Renee Auberjonois was in it, and so was it David Naughton? I forget which Naughton was in it, but so it was a film noir musical on Broadway from the 80s, and I loved that. I loved it because it was a film noir. It was really cool.
So it's possible that you could like other types of musicals. You just haven't been exposed to them yet.
No, I have. I've seen a lot of musicals. I don't like them. I was at Miss Saigon opening night. Yeah.
Well, so see, these are more modern musicals.
Oh, Shenandoah. Ugh, I don't like these musicals.
Shenandoah is from the 70s. No, I'm not talking about these.
I don't like musicals. Don't like them. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm not saying that people should be like me.
Mark
is
going to experience an awakening.
I don't think I will.
Presence. You will.
And
then you'll be able to stand next to Brent Spiner as he sings songs from Oklahoma. You'll be able to stand there proud because you will participate.
I don't see that happening. I don't.
Don't trust it.
I've tried to get into musicals. I just don't like them.
So you're afraid.
Not even Planet of the Apes, the musical. I hate every ape I see.
I would totally go see that Planet of the Apes the musical. That's the next logical step for that franchise. Steve Asbell, let's get him on the phone. We're ready for plenty of time.
Make it happen, Steve.
But today we're talking about a very interesting franchise, which has gone through its own ups and downs. Of course, we're talking about Superman.
Its own up and away.
Up and aways.
Thank you. We're on the same page. Thank you. Very good.
Get out of my head, Doctorman.
I refuse.
There you go.
My son.
Okay, so let's join Darren Doctorman and Ed Gross in conversation about Superman. And we'll be back afterwards with a few closing thoughts.
$70,000 people are here, and Bob Dylan is the reason for it.
Inspired by the true story.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on a stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
Make some noise, BD.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro, a complete unknown. Now playing only in theaters. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
This year, Santa's bringing the power of Energizer into his workshop.
Whoa, the Energizer Bunny's got so much power.
Wait, he's powered up all the toys. I think that means we're done for the year.
I love this bunny.
He's the hardest working helper the North Pole has ever seen. And he wants all your gifts to have the power of the #1 longest lasting AA battery. So this holiday season, stock up on Santa's and the elves' favorite battery, Energizer Ultimate Lithium.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Well, everybody, welcome to this panel.
Yeah. Is this our soul guy? You're our soul guy, I think. So there you go. Yeah, leave it.
Look, the appeal of Superman has become very limited in recent days, but we're sure after the new movie comes out, people will come back to panels like this. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about. I'm sitting here with Ed Gross, who is the author of Voices from Krypton, which is a new book just released. You can look for it wherever you get fine books these days. Ed, welcome.
Why, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Superman was officially the first superhero. I mean, they named the name superhero after him. And tell a little bit about your history with Superman and the general history of superheroes.
Well, I mean, my history started way back in the 1960s.
Travel back with us.
Travel back with us, yes, back to those days. No, I discovered the character myself personally with reruns of the George Reeves show. Sure. I had no idea of this character until then. And the weird thing is it coincided with, my father had a comic book, which I had no idea what a comic book was, but it was the history of dogs. It was this 1957 comic book he had because he loved dogs. And I fell in love with the format of comics without knowing what those were. Right. Then at the ending of every episode of Superman, it said, based on the comic magazines from DC Comics. So I realized they were making comics based on this TV show. So I was like, oh my God, let me check this out. So I found Superman comics, and that, started it. And in the 60s, I started collecting everything on Superman, and it grew from there. And then I just went, my philosophy about Superman is I go with the S. So wherever the S goes, I go. People always say, who's your favorite Superman? I'll say Christopher Reeve, but I go with the S.
So you're an S man.
I'm definitely an S man in all sorts of ways. But yes, but I go with the S basically. And as far as what was the other half of that? Superheroes? Well,
just the introduction of Superman and the birth of the superhero comic.
Well, I mean, like you were saying, there was no superhero. I mean, it was Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster came up with this concept. which was sort of, a hybrid of things that had come before, like, Doc Savage and John Carter and the
were
Phantom.
Sort of dramatic interpretations of what we would call illustrated stories.
Yeah, and people with extraordinary abilities, but not super abilities.
Right.
Sort of perfections of humanity, but not,
not beyond those of mortal men.
Exactly. Yeah, this is well put. And they came up with the idea of the person who could do these extraordinary things and put him in the costume with the cape and the trunks and the whole thing. And Superman debuted in 1938, and it was an immediate sensation, and it triggered the entire genre and the entire comic book industry, really.
And one of the things that helped its reach and its popularity was a radio show. They did just a couple years after the comic book appeared. They began to produce a radio show starring Bud Collyer as Clark Kent / Superman. I hope that's not a giveaway. They are the same person.
What?
Yeah, well, I was surprised too. But that was, very dramatic for its time, even for the time of, great radio shows. It really brought these stories to life and created a whole new way for especially kids to enjoy it and to pester their parents about, buying the Superman stuff, which was starting to appear in stores.
Well, that's the the really incredible thing I think about Superman is that the merchandise started right away.
Yeah.
I mean, Superman had, at the World's Fair, there was Superman Day at the 1939 World's Fair, New York World's Fair, where they had. There's some debate of who it was, but they say Ray Middleton was playing him in the costume for the first time ever put on the costume, an actor named Ray Middleton. And they had Superman Day where kids were dressing up and competing in sports activities and stuff. But Superman had merchandise based on him almost right away. The radio show, as you said, was in 1940. The Fleischer cartoon started arriving in 1941.
Right.
And in truth, there has not been a decade since 1940 where Superman has not been in some form of production since he started. And we're going to have a new movie next year. We have new TV shows now. And it's just incredible. I don't think there's been a character who's been in some form of production in every decade since his creation for 80 years.
And there really hasn't been a character that is more sort of old-fashioned American as Superman.
Yeah.
He is... certainly during the war effort, he was a patriot. They showed him with the American flag all the time, and he was even more boffo for America than even Captain America was.
Yeah.
But the only difference is if Superman had punched Hitler, it would have ripped his head off.
Yeah.
And that sort of would have ended the whole thing. But that's an interesting thing. The stories they wrote for Superman, they had to limit what he did because he could solve the world's problems fairly quickly. But he chose, like has happened in other mythology, free will for Earth beings to have. And he didn't interfere. You must not interfere in human history.
I've heard that.
So talk a little about that, about the way that the writers sort of picked specific stories for Superman to deal with.
Well, I mean, they would have him, along what you're saying, is encourage humanity because they knew that they couldn't realistically go over there in World War II and just smack Hitler around or smack, the other leaders around and just end the war because it would be an insult to the soldiers who were over there fighting. So they would have to manufacture these things of Superman selling war bonds or encouraging people to go over there and fight and doing what you could in America to fight it on this end of things.
Right.
And they would have to come up with those kinds of stories to do it, or ignore the war where they could and just have Superman fighting these larger-than-life threats rather than the grounded threats that we were dealing with in reality.
Right. And I think that the 1978 movie brought this up with that line that I quoted before, you must not interfere with human history, rather let your leadership stir others to.
And that's again, it's always evolving, right?
Yeah.
The message of Superman is always evolving. I mean, that's why we've gone from truth, justice, and the American way to where we are now, which is truth, justice, and a better tomorrow.
Right.
And it is that. It is, and this is something that Brandon Routh, who has played Superman in Superman Returns and on the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event on the CW, he has embraced this very much and speaks about it a lot. It is being that example. Let inspire others to do it, but you cannot do it for them.
Yeah.
But be the light that leads the way.
Yeah. Teach a man to fish.
Well, that's it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an old philosophy, but it's a strong one. And I think the character, it goes right back to, people say it's corny and stuff, but it's really not. Be the vision of hope.
Right.
Be the beacon of light that leads us out of the darkness, but not be everything, not be the solution, but be, lead us towards that solution.
Yeah. Don't be a dictator. Be a leader.
Exactly.
Yeah. Of course, after the radio shows, there was a series of Saturday morning serials that were shown on movie theaters.
Yes.
That were very successful. And who was the first person to play Superman there?
Kirk Alyn. Kirk Alyn played him in two serials, 1948 Superman, and then it was 1950s Adaman versus Superman.
Right.
And they were really at the tail end of the success of serials, and they were very successful. I mean, because of the character, they made them successful at a time when serials were really dropping off. So they were able to get some box office success out of that, and there were rumblings of a third one, but then instead they decided to do the TV series with George Reeves, except they did the movie version first, which was Superman and the Mole Man.
Yes. Yeah. When they really weren't moles. They were men. That would dig underground.
And they had little furry
moles.
costumes.
Yes.
But they weren't moles. No. Far from moles. These were not mole people.
But in those serials, they did figure out, in addition to the Fleischer cartoons, the visual ways of showing what Superman did. And, they had a couple of those Lydecker shots with a puppet on a string flying past. And, pardon me. And they figured out, physical ways of being able to tell this story without having to have a man who actually flew. But they had figured it out by then, which helped make the production of the TV show a lot easier, or a little more figured out.
Well, the first serial, though, they made the decision, first of all, the radio show that carried over to the Fleischer cartoons was that instead of Superman leaping tall buildings at a single bound, that he would fly.
Right.
It just made more sense rather than him jumping around because he looked silly hopping the way he did. So they made him fly. And in the serials, they had the flying, but whenever Kirk Alyn would take that initial jump, he'd turn into a cartoon.
Yes.
Right. He'd suddenly become animated. He wasn't fooling anybody. And he would fly and do his rescue and then turn back into Kirk Alyn again. Then in the second serial, they did do a trick with the plates and the wires and all the different things. And that did carry over. George Reeves in Superman and the Mole Men was on wires, but they had one mishap and the wire snapped. And he collapsed to the studio floor, and he said, "No more wires." Yeah. I believe his quote was, "Superman may fly on wires. I don't."
Right.
And they built the best breastplate and had him lay on it.
Yeah.
And,
this is when he laid on the board.
And they used the same shot forever.
Yeah. And every time you heard the sound.
Exactly.
Look, I have wonderful memories of that TV series when I was growing up, and he was the man, he was Superman, and it was fascinating to see that transition from basically the 1950s representation of Superman that carried on in syndication through the greater part of the 1970s and led us into the big, huge motion picture that came out.
With a coincidentally named Christopher Reeve instead of George Reeves. So I never understood how that could possibly be.
It's probably destiny, I think. Destiny plays a hand. But obviously the discovery of Christopher Reeve, a roommate of Robin Williams, to play this character, and you can see in his screen test that they have on the DVDs, he is absolutely perfect from the first moment.
Oh my God, it's amazing. And the scene I always point to show that how he nails it. And it, like, my favorite scene is him grabbing the helicopter. I've got you, who's got, I've got you, miss, who's got you, that kind of thing. That's a great scene. But the scene where he, to me, really nails it is in Superman 2 when Lois is under the elevator in Paris.
Right.
And the chain is snapped, the elevator's falling, there's a hydrogen bomb under the elevator. Superman swoops in, grabs the elevator, catches it. She snaps her head up. She goes, Superman, thank God. And he looks at her and he smiles at her. He goes, I believe this is your floor.
That's right.
And he smiles that smile. And to me, that is Superman. That one moment there nails Superman. No superheroics, no anything.
Right.
And it's just Christopher Reeve is just incredibly stepping off the comic book page and being Superman.
And it's interesting, that little quip is almost in the service of a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
But it's a good James Bond.
Yeah.
It's someone who would never stab you in the back or shoot you.
Exactly.
Which is nice. I want to talk a little bit about the reaction to the 1978 movie, because I know it's one of your favorites. It's certainly one of mine. Never before had such money been poured into an IP like this. I mean, the IP wasn't even heard of then.
Right.
And it was the Salkins really wanted to make this an absolute blockbuster, and they weren't stopping at anything, even short of not hiring the director back. Tell a little bit about that process that they went through, because they were originally planning on shooting 2 movies at once,
right.
And they shot a lot of the second one during Donner's time on the film. But then they realized, oh my God, we got to get this movie out in theaters, or we will not be able to finish the other one. Right. They ran out of money, basically.
Yeah, the intent was to shoot the 2 movies, but in the beginning, they could not raise the money for this movie. I mean, nobody was taking this thing seriously. Mm-hmm. Then they hired Mario Puzo to write the screenplay. They got some attention. Then they hired Marlon Brando to play Jor-El for a ridiculous amount of money, but it worked because suddenly everybody was taking it seriously. Then they got Gene Hackman to play Lex Luthor. That really sealed the deal, and they got all the money they needed to do it. The problem was nobody, as you had said, had poured this kind of money into a project before, but they still didn't know how to make a movie of this kind.
Right.
It was one thing to do spaceships and things like that, but how are you going to make a man fly, right? The tagline was, you'll believe a man can fly. How are you going to make a man fly and make it believable? And the problem was, yes, they were shooting 1 and 2 together, but they had, throughout the early days and many months in, they had to figure out how to work it. And there was so much experimentation, and all of that experimentation cost tremendous amounts of money.
Sure.
And they realized they weren't going to finish, so they had to put Superman 2 aside and devote all of their energy to Superman 1. And Richard Donner was the guy calling the shots, and the guy who the Salkinds couldn't stand because he was spending all their money.
Right.
But
he was getting the movie done.
He was getting the movie done, but not fast enough for their
Sure.
takes. And, they weren't worried about quality as much as they were worried about their money.
Exactly.
So they brought in Richard Lester to be their liaison. And Richard Lester
To
came
be
on
their spy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Basically, and also because Donner wouldn't talk to them, and they wouldn't
Right.
talk to him. And they owed Lester money. From the 3 and 4 Musketeers,
Right.
Which they had split into 2 movies without anybody knowing they were splitting it into 2 movies because
Right.
they were classy.
A lot of the actors were very upset about that.
Oh yeah, that's why there's a Salkind clause in contracts
Exactly.
now, so that you have to tell people how many movies you're making, which is so funny. But then after Superman became a success and they had to go back to finish Superman 2, they no longer felt obligated to hire Donner back.
Right.
So they hired Lester.
And they lost Gene Hackman.
Who absolutely refused to come back. And Margot Kidder wouldn't come back until she got a substantial raise.
Right.
And Christopher Reeve wouldn't come back until
Right.
they got a substantial raise. I don't know if that answered your question or not. But
Well, I mean, it's
such a long story.
It's
but-
a fascinating story of how that movie got made.
Oh, yeah.
And if any of you have the DVDs with the Donner and Mankiewicz commentary, it is absolutely amazing, the depth they go into. And basically the fun that they had doing the movie.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if this story is apocryphal or actually happened, but Donner wanted Mankiewicz to come in and help with the script. Oh, yeah. And Mankiewicz went to Donner's house, and out in the backyard, Donner was wearing a Superman outfit, running around and saying, "Hey, let's do Superman."
That's right. That's the story.
It's hilarious because Donner was basically a kid. I mean, he had a history of making some big movies. The Omen was huge, and he started doing television and did a bunch of classic Gilligan's Island episodes, which I am particularly proud of him for. But it's something that he really had a vision for the film. And I think without him, it never would have been as successful as it was. It wouldn't have been as quality conscious as he was about it. Mm-hmm. And it's truly amazing. I mean, it's basically 3 separate movies that he put together. The beginning part on Krypton. Yes, I'm saying Krypton because that's what Jor-El says. And the second part in Smallville with Glenn Ford, which is an amazing. It's an Andrew Wyeth take on Americana in Canada. And the third part is, Manhattan or Metropolis. And it's really stylistically and tone-wise, there are 3 different movies that are these chapters in Superman's life. And it's so well crafted, and it is consistent in its tone enough. And it can get funny, but it never is taking advantage of the characters. We're laughing with them, and we're not laughing at them. Well, maybe in the case of Otis, maybe we're laughing at him a little bit. But it's truly brilliant. Now, but during all this, the DC Comics, as it was then called, basically sort of were trying to revamp their portrayal of Superman to sort of catch up with the modern interpretation of him. What are some of the things that they did from the 60s, which they had steered it a little bit toward camp to go along with the Batman series, and tell how the 70s changed the Superman comics.
Well, the 70s started off with them trying to depower him, to make him more earthbound. Denny O'Neil wrote an arc, which I actually loved. It started with a thing called Kryptonite Nevermore, or Kryptonite No More, which was like a 10 or 11 issue arc that I thought was amazing. And I've always loved it. I still have it I have a comic rack at home, and that original run is still in that rack. And it's just this great story in which Superman's powers are being siphoned off by this creature from another dimension. And by the end of the story, he realizes he has no being should have the kind of power he has. Mm-hmm. And he wants to not get the power back. So it's great, except Denny got tired of writing it because he feels like it wasn't working for him. He doesn't like writing gods. And DC, the next issue, he went right back to full power with no explanation. Right. So after that, it was right back to business as usual.
He basically screwed the pooch.
I mean, there was nothing. I mean, they just ignored it, basically. So they went right back to Superman. There was a little bit of questioning his place. And should he, back to what we were saying earlier, should he do everything for humanity or let humanity find itself? Elliot S. Magan wrote some stories. Yeah. Must There Be a Superman, which was excellent. And he tried to deal with that question a lot more. So they dealt with that a bit, but it was really in the 80s where they really tried to revamp the character. And certainly when John Byrne came in 86, that's when they really changed the character.
Is that when they made him a TV reporter?
Well, that was during that era with Kryptonite No More and all that. They tried doing that too. And they tried, but that didn't stick that long either. It's just, none of those changes were solid changes, you know. I do want to say something what you're saying about Donner. I just want to mention this. Yeah. First of all, you brought up his Gilligan's Island. When I spoke to him for the book, the thing I loved about him was found as charming as well as he loved talking about Gilligan's Island as much as he loved talking about Superman the movie, which was amazing. And the other thing is, you want to talk about his impact, what his influence was on this franchise, the Superman franchise. Superman the movie is all him. Yeah. Superman 2 is very heavily him, even though Richard Lester directed, the parts that he didn't. Superman 3 has nothing to do with Richard Donner, and it's terrible. Yeah. And so without his influence, you can see, without him or Tom Mankiewicz, how bad a Superman movie is. Yeah. And I think that is a perfect example of what he brought to it. And a Superman movie without someone with that kind of quality control what we were left with.
Well,
it says a lot.
He was famous for having this guide word that he told his crew, and he had a sign made from the English sign makers. It has a picture of Superman flying, and next to it says verisimilitude,
right,
which means the feeling of real.
Yes,
and I think that is one of his guidelines that helps that first movie become completely believable. If you accept the fact that there is a Superman, right? And the first two sections of the movie make you believe in Superman.
Right.
And by the time you're in Metropolis, it's completely real and it's completely believable, and everything works in its own setting. And it's truly an amazing balance of tones that he manages to keep going, because it could, as we saw in later movies, it could go really bad really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that some people consider comic books cartoony when they aren't, that's some of the problems that you got later in the Batman franchise as well. They thought that comic books meant funny, right, and it meant for kids. And Superman, though being very appealing to kids, the first movie is appealing to kids of all ages. And that's one of the things that my dad and his friend, who had Superman comics when they were 9 years old, and they went to see the movie first. And, they had been friends for, 60 years. And it was amazing to see their reaction to it. And then my dad took me, and I absolutely loved it. And it's a connection through generations.
Right.
And I think then Superman is this constant, this hero, this mythology that we need to keep, to keep the generations connected in some way.
Absolutely, and that movie, by the way, Superman the movie, is only halfway through his history.
Yeah.
Which is amazing to think about.
Yeah.
That's only halfway through. And there's been so much more since.
Absolutely. But the funny thing is how much that movie has influenced the second half of Superman's life. Let's talk a little bit about that now. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of television attempts and one rather successful Superboy series that happened in syndication. Was it?
Yep, yeah, that was.
And I think the Salkins had something to do with that show. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was, it was, they had done Superman 3, then they licensed Superman out to Canon Films,
right,
which was a disaster for Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. And then Ilyas Alkind produced 100 episodes of the Superboy TV show. Mm-hmm. First with John Haymes Newton as Superboy, and then Gerard Christopher taking over for the role. It's a very low-budget show. It does get better as it goes on in the 100 episodes, but it's kind of the lost chapter of the Superman filmed adventures, because as soon as those 100 episodes were filmed and released, and I guess the rights reverted back to Warner Brothers because it was produced by Viacom originally, they just disappeared because the next year Lois and Clark appeared on ABC.
Right.
So the show is interesting. It's certainly worth checking out. It does improve as it goes on, but it is sort of the stepchild of the Superman mythology in terms of the filmed entertainment. But they do embrace the comic books more as it goes on, and it does become interesting. But it is certainly on the lower tier of what was produced.
Almost erased from existence.
Yeah, pretty much. Very hard to find now.
I think a couple of them are up on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can find them that sort of way, but not in a major release.
Yeah, not in an
DC
official
Universe
way.
Was a streaming thing that you had the whole 4 seasons on there, the 100 episodes, but now they're really difficult to find. Yep.
I mean, for a while, the original Superman was hard to find on that server. You mentioned Lois and Clark, which was sort of the first quote unquote adult telling of the Superman story in more of the sort of moonlighting
very much so.
phase. And Robert Butler, whom we talked to on the Treksperts, he not only directed the pilot of Star Trek, he directed the pilot of this. And as you may or may not know, a director of the pilot gets residuals on every episode from the series. So he passed away recently, but he was talking about how this retelling of the Superman mythology from Lois's point of view was fascinating, and the casting was great. Talk a little bit about that, because they had a great opening theme, and the feeling of Superman was in there, even though he was very rarely seen on the show.
Well, initially, I mean, the problem with Lois and Clark, in my opinion, there are going to be a lot of people. It's so funny. It's like it's what you grew up with, right? It's like James Bond. I grew up with Sean Connery, so he's like those are the best ones for me.
Yeah.
A lot of people grew up with Lois and Clark, and that's their interpretation of Superman. They love it. Well, my problem with Lois and Clark is it started off fantastic. I mean, the casting of Terry Hatcher as Lois Lane and Dean Cain as Superman, Clark Kent / Superman, was great. I had no problem with it. And the approach of Deborah Joy Levine as the creator and executive producer in that first season was wonderful, because it really was focused on the romance, the developing romance between Lois and Clark, with superheroics sort of as the background, with Lex Luthor thrown in as a background character as well. And the superheroics were always there, and the Kryptonian heritage of Superman was there as well, but dealt with in smaller doses. As the show went on, they got rid of Deborah Joy Levine, they brought in other producers, and the villains got sillier. The effects budget couldn't handle the effects. They were trying to do more superheroics, and even though the romance was still there, the silliness of the show took center stage. And because the budget couldn't support what they were trying to do story superheroic wise, they said, we got to do more Superman.
Right.
They couldn't do it. And to me, the show fell off the rails and never quite got back up, because the first season was remarkable, and it never, in my opinion, never quite got back up to what it was.
Yeah.
So the potential was there, but it never quite met it again.
I would agree. And a couple years later, there was yet another attempt to do Superman without doing Superman. And that was called Smallville.
Yeah.
And I think this was one of the most popular TV shows to center around Superman. I mean, since the 50s.
Absolutely.
And talk a little bit about that, because they were very careful to sort of stay away from the portrayal of Superman and just deal with sort of the mystery surrounding Clark and his friends.
Well, I mean, it's why I have the distinction of being, I think, the first person to interview the show's co-creator, Al Goff. He created it with Miles Miller. And I remember saying to Al specifically, a Superman show without Superman, that's ridiculous. It's never going to work. 10 years later, Al still points that out to me, how wrong I was. But no, the success of the show is the fact that, they focused on Clark Kent. They focused on his evolution, the gradual unfolding of those powers, the revelation of those powers as they would kick in as he got older.
Right.
Growing up in Smallville, dealing with his friends, dealing with the relationship with Lex Luthor, which we know is doomed. We know it's destined that they're going to become the greatest enemies ever. But watching the growth and then the disintegration of that relationship. And his evolution into a hero, into his destiny as Superman. The problem is the show should have gone 5 years, but it went 10.
Right.
And because it went 10...
They had to stretch it out.
Well, what happened is by the time he becomes Superman, even though my biggest problem with the show is he sort of becomes Superman at the end, even though, whatever.
He doesn't even become Superman.
He doesn't really. He becomes, he just CG, he becomes CG Superman rather than Superman, really. But I won't get into that. It's my biggest thing on the show, is my biggest anger about the show. He fights everything he's supposed to fight as Superman before he becomes Superman. He's fought Doomsday, he's fought Brainiac, he's fought everything. So I'm not exactly sure. I think he's going to be bored as Superman because he's fought everything he's supposed to. But that being said, it was a remarkable job of exploring who this guy is and how he becomes what he's destined to become. And I think they did a really overall with all my jibes about the final episode, they did a really great job of creating a Superman show for people who didn't want to watch a Superman show.
Right.
You know, for people who wouldn't have watched a Superman show, but he did watch the show about this kid.
Well, it's sort of the template for IP productions that are done now. That everyone's trying to make, like, let's say, a Star Wars for people who wouldn't watch Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly.
And but the way Smallville did it, they did it without losing the core audience that liked Superman.
Right, but they brought in a whole new audience that would not have tuned into a Superman show, and that's the brilliance.
And that was the way that they did it correctly.
Right.
And let's talk about that one episode where we got to see Christopher Reeve again.
Yeah, Virgil Swan.
Yeah.
Who, he's in a wheelchair. Of course, that was after his accident. I have a feeling these are not for us. That was after it, but he was able to open up Clark's eyes to his Kryptonian heritage for the first time. And it was brilliant. It was a joining of the generations, basically. It brought in the John Williams theme for the first time to the show, which for anyone who's a fan of that stuff,
it just makes
it just gives you a chill just hearing it. Still have my fingers crossed that James Gunn is going to use it in the new movie. We'll see. But yeah, having Christopher Reeve on it was just a beautiful way of tying it together.
Yeah.
And so it was great.
Let's talk about the next movie iteration, Bryan Singer's Superman Returns.
Yeah. Which, do you have a specific?
No. Just bringing it up because there are aspects of that film that are really, really good.
Absolutely.
And there are aspects that are absolutely appalling.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting combination of these. Why don't you talk about some of those?
Well, I mean, look, it's too much of an homage to the Richard Donner films. I don't really have a problem with it being a continuation of those movies, but I do have a problem of it being too much of repeat of dialogue, repeat of plot.
Member berries.
Lex Luthor's real estate scheme is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, there's also a huge issue for me of Lex Luthor practically killing Superman and having no comeuppance.
Right.
At the end, I interviewed Brandon Routh for the book, and I said to him at the end, when Lex Luthor flies off in a helicopter, and, why isn't he like the helicopter blades go flying off, or why isn't the sides of the helicopter crushing in?
Right.
And we cut outside to the John Williams theme, and Superman's crushing in the helicopter and flying it.
Yeah.
And Brandon's like on the Zoom, looks at goes, "Where were you when we were making the movie?
Exactly.
Where were you?" But it's too much focus. It's dreary. It doesn't have enough oomph to it, but then it's got that plane sequence, which is astounding.
And it's almost panel for panel from a Superman comic book.
Yeah.
And I also think that Lois Lane was miscast.
Totally, she's too young. A Pulitzer Prize winning. Kate Bosworth.
But the thing is, they had Lois Lane in the movie. Parker Posey would have made a perfect Lois Lane.
She would have. You're absolutely right.
And it's just odd that was missed because it just kind of shows that there was a little miscommunication about what this character was.
Right.
And it's the biggest misstep in my view.
I think the misstep too is not using Brandon Routh again, because he was very good as Superman.
He was great.
And they used him in Crisis on Infinite Earths,
right.
And he was so good in it that he, as the Kingdom Comes Superman, that he stepped into it effortlessly and proved how good he was. That the guy deserved another shot.
I like him a lot, and it's a missed opportunity that it just missed the opportunity.
It missed the opportunity, right?
Then we go into the big sort of retro phase of Superman with Man of Steel,
right?
And a lot of people have very mixed emotions about this one. The audience is really split on this as to what it did to the Superman mythos. What is your feeling?
My feeling is, I've really done a reassessment of the three movies: Superman, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Right.
I'm going to ignore the other Justice League. Just have to. I've really decided to look at this as an arc. It was an approach that was taken. I don't necessarily agree with everything done in it. I like Henry Cavill as Superman. I think he did a great job. I don't like an angsty Superman. I think when you make Superman too looking constipated every time he has to use his powers to save somebody,
right?
when you make him too dark, his eyes always flaring red. It comes like Star Trek when they make Starfleet corrupt and it dark and getting away from the tenets of what Star Trek is. It's the same thing with Superman. He has to be the bastion of hope. He has to be the beacon of hope in a world of darkness, or at least be moving in that way. And I feel he, until the very end, he wasn't really moving in that way.
That's true.
And that's a mistake, because you don't want, the more you play him for darkness, the more that becomes the accepted model.
Yeah.
And I don't appreciate that for that character. He needs to be representing hope.
He shouldn't be sulking in the corner.
Exactly.
He should be fighting to use his powers for good.
Right. And then in Batman v Superman, I think it was, where the house there's a flood and the woman's on the roof with her kids, and she has an S on the roof, and she's reaching out to Superman, and Superman's up in the sky just floating there. It's like, dude, could you save this, please?
There's a problem down here.
Christopher Reeve would have scooped them up, stopped the flood, and whatever. I mean, it would have been taken care of. But again, in looking at it, say, okay, that was an arc it's done. But the people who were complaining that Henry got ripped off and all this stuff, it's like, well, you know what? Brandon Routh got one movie and a guest shot. Henry got 3 movies, 3.5 if you count the Justice League, as people call
Justice
it.
League,
Justice League. And a guest spot, a cameo in the Black Adam movie. That's a hell of a lot more than Brandon Routh got. Yeah. And now we're moving on. And it's what I said at the beginning, right? I follow the yes. So it's now time for David Cornsweet to take it over. And it's like, you had a good shot, you had a good run, Henry, and sorry it wasn't everything it should have been, but they're pretty solid movies for the most part, and we're moving on.
What's your reaction to what we've seen so far from the new James Gunn Superman?
I'm one of those people that's going to really hold judgment until I see the movie.
Sure.
I'll be honest with you. But I mean, look, people are freaking out about the baggy costume. First, it was he's taking his time putting on his boot when there's a probe outside destroying Metropolis or whatever it's doing. Okay, I get it. My favorite is when somebody put Godzilla out there shooting his atomic breath and he's putting on his boot. Okay, I get that. I thought that was funny. Then the costumes with telephoto lens comes out when the costume's all baggy. Mm-hmm. My attitude is, do you really think they're going to put him out in a baggy costume? I'm sure they're going to do something to tighten that up, like with CG or something.
Maybe, or have an explanation.
Or he's going to have a baggy Right, there's going to be something, whatever it is. But I'm excited to see it because, like I said, I go with the yes. If this is the new movie and this is the new guy, I'm going to be there opening night.
Sure.
I'm hoping they're going to use some version of the John Williams theme just to treat it like the James Bond theme.
Though I think it might not be a bad idea to move away from that.
Maybe.
As much as we love it, and it pained me to hear it in Superman Returns.
Did it?
Because it didn't fit. It didn't fit that movie.
See, I think if you use it, like the way they did it in the plane scene, where
if that had been the first time it appeared, I would have been all over
I'm with you.
But,
I'm with you.
But when they set up the movie to open exactly like
John
Superman
Altman,
the
the
movie,
problem is John Altman told me that he was told by Brian Singer he had to do it note for note exactly the same. He wanted to vary it, and I think if you vary it...
It's a bad call, Ripley, a bad call.
It's a very bad call.
But I think we're both looking forward to the new film, which comes out next year, theoretically.
July. Yep.
And we're looking forward to seeing how Superman moves into his 90s.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Unbelievable.
Yep. And like I was saying before, this character has been in production since 1940, every decade.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Just amazing. So,
well, he's really super, wouldn't you say?
He is really super, and so is my book, Voices from Krypton.
Voices from Krypton by Ed Gross, and visit us at the Treksperts booth, and we have copies for sale. So, thank you so much. Thank you, Ed Gross.
Thank you, Darren.
Can we ask a...
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
So in talk, actually, I was curious, were you able to find out more about the Bryan Singer sequel that was supposed to come up from talking to Brandon Routh? I know it never happened, but...
There wasn't, honestly, a lot of serious talk about it. I mean, it was just, Brian made the comment a lot about wanting to go Wrath of Khan with it. You know what I mean?
But the movie tanked. So it was never going to happen.
And a big part of the reason the movie tanked is they put all the money that was spent on those aborted attempts to make a Superman movie in the 90s, the Tim Burton movies, the Nicolas Cage thing, and all the ones before that. They took all that money, wasted money, and put it on the budget of this. So it drove the budget of this up by probably $50-60 million. So this movie was never going to make its money back. Yes. I mean, because nobody paid attention to the fact that Superman 4 made $15 million and this made almost $400 million.
Yes.
So that's a big jump, but it wasn't enough.
Wasn't enough.
So
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Appreciate you, and enjoy the rest of the con.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your
windshield wipers? eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Whatever you love, find it on eBay. eBay, things people love.
When unprecedented times are all the time, it's time to start walking the talk with PwC. Leaders like you turn to PwC to see and stay ahead. Upskill your workforce, use intelligent automation, and transform big ideas into breakthrough outcomes. Explore the human-led, tech-powered solutions that help you thrive. It's all part of PwC. Learn more at pwc.com.
Streaming now on Peacock. Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie are back.
That's hot. Loves it.
For a show-stopping reunion that will prove putting on an opera is anything but simple.
We're really good at this.
One thing's for sure, they won't be upstaged.
Good to have you back. Come on, we've got a show to do.
Paris and Nicole, The Encore, a 3-part reunion special. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Wow, you weren't kidding. That's a great conversation. So let me ask you, what's your favorite iteration of Superman, Steve Melching?
Oh my gosh, favorite iteration? I wouldn't consider myself a deep cut Superman fan, but I mean, I've always been partial to the Christopher Reeve movie from 1978, the Richard Donner movie. It just, with the combination of that casting, the amazing John Williams score, and just the tone of the movie just captured what I always thought the heart and essence of the character was.
Ashley's going to say Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, to be a contrarian. That was my favorite. If you'd seen the deleted scenes, you'd know what a masterpiece, what a lost masterpiece it is. Although I have to say, I love the Superman 4 in Electric Boogaloo, the history of canon films. There's, about 10 minutes where they talk about Superman 4. That is wildly entertaining. Steve, I'm going to say, because you said Superman the movie, just so it doesn't just go Superman the movie, Superman the movie, Superman the movie. I'm going to say, I love that Superman animated series, not only the original, the Max Fleischer cartoons, but I love that more recent, because I only saw it recently because my son was telling me.
The 90s one from Warner Brothers.
He was like, I know you love Batman, the anime series. You should really watch the Superman anime series. I'm like, He said, no, watch it. And we watched it. I said, this is really good.
It's good.
It's brilliant. In fact, that was, you took mine, Mark. I mean, I think my favorite Superman story was maybe the first appearance of Darkseid on that particular cartoon. And just what
Jack
happened,
Kirby was in
Dan
it.
Turpin and all that. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, that was great. I'm totally with you on that. What about you? I think we know Darren. I mean, it's hard for you to answer anything.
Well, because you can read my mind.
Pink. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, Christopher Reeve as Superman in the first film is perfect. It's just perfect. And Brando as Jor-El is weird but wonderful. And it's 3 movies put together.
Hello.
And all
Bring
3
me a stick of butter.
Oh,
wait, what? Sorry, I got my movies mixed up. Go ahead.
Last Tango on Krypton.
Oh my God!
Can you imagine?
I have never
what do
wanted
those
to make
knowledge crystals look like.
I have never wanted to make a fan film before. I think it's a waste of time if you don't own the IP, and it's something
Get the crystals.
But oh my God, that is so funny. I was going to say just for Halloween, dressing up in those costumes, have somebody follow you around with the UV light. But
I do have a Jor-El outfit, as you've seen. And it's pretty darn good.
It's good, yeah.
But we need a Susanna York for our last Tango.
No.
Oh.
No, thanks. I'm good.
I don't know. It's really funny. Last Tango on Krypton. It wouldn't be Krypton because it's Marlon Brando. It had to be Krypton.
Krypton.
Last Tango on Krypton. Oh my God!
You mentioned the radio show. I remember listening to that a little bit as a kid and really enjoying that, and even the earlier, the television series, the earlier Reeves,
right? The ones done by
he defeated a lot of mad bombers.
Oh yeah, George Reeves. I love that.
Warner Brothers just came out with the Super Friends on complete series on Blu-ray.
That was probably my introduction to Superman. Probably watching the cartoons on Saturday morning.
Me too. And George Reeves in the TV show.
Of course, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was my original Superman. In fact, I always kind of liked him when I was a kid. I think I was partial to him over Christopher Reeve. I always thought it was weird. They were both had the word Reeve in their name.
Yeah,
because
it meant something.
George Reeves,
yes,
was influential on Lucille Ball for her to support Star Trek. So let's start that rumor now. Let's start that rumor.
There's an episode where he appeared on I Love Lucy
for the survival of Star Trek.
It's true.
I'm still hung up on this short film. I think we're going to banish.
He'll start
by banishing Ursa and Zod and to Ibiza, and we'll just just go from there. Yeah.
There's another iteration of Superman that I'm sure Darren remembers. His appearances on Sesame Street in those little animated segments.
Well, that was Filmation. That was Filmation did those. And, they had the same music. It was so good. Nope. This was years before that, actually.
Okay.
But it was great. And for limited animation that it was at the time, it was really good and really well drawn.
Yeah. Beautiful art. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're so grateful to Ed Gross. If you haven't checked out his book already, it's available on Amazon. You should pick it up. He has 2 books about Superman, one from Insight, one from the Cell Company. Both of them are terrific. One is with Bob Greenberger, one he did himself.
That's right, Superman, double jeopardy.
You can never go wrong with a book from Ed Gross because he's a terrific writer, super talented. And if you're not a huge Superman fan, you can pick up one of his other books, The 50-Year Mission, which I highly recommend. Because I'm always happy to get checks. Okay. So, anyway, thank you to Ed Gross. Thank you to Darren for such a scintillating interview with Ed Gross. And thank you to all of you out there in listener land for joining us for another episode of Tech 78. To be sure that you don't miss any exciting episodes, you want to subscribe at TrekspertsPlus.com. You can do that on Spotify or through Inglorious Treksperts or on the 430 Movie via Apple Podcasts. However you get this podcast, please subscribe. It helps support the show and all these wonderful episodes. So on behalf of Steve Melching, Ashley Edward Miller, Darren Docterman, and myself, Mark A. Altman, fire the rockets.
Tech 78 is an exclusive podcast from Treksperts Plus.